Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's special council meeting. We have three items on the agenda: the 2018 appointments to committees and boards, our strat session on Crosby, and then we'll be going into in camera. We'll begin with the appointments, and we'll start with the chairs and the vice chairs of the three standing committees. I'll take nominations for Chair of Community and Infrastructure Services. Councillor Schneider.
I nominate Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Okay. Councillor Gazzola.
I nominate Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. Any other nominations? If not, Councillor Fernandez, do you allow your name to stand?
I do.
Okay. Councillor Galloway Seelock, do you allow your name to stand? Okay, thank you. So everyone, I think, knows the procedures. There's ballots in front of you, and you can choose one of Galloway Seelock or Fernandez. That's for when we get to Kitchener Housing. Do you want to sit through this, or do you want to?
No, go ahead.
I can.
No, go ahead. Part of the procedure. I'm fine.
You know what? I'll finish Community Infrastructure Services, then I'll jump over to you.
Your call.
Yep. Okay, thanks. Sorry, Bob.
Okay, so Councillor Ioannidis votes for Councillor Galloway Seelock. Councillor Singh votes for Councillor Galloway Seelock. Councillor Galloway Seelock votes for Councillor Galloway Seelock. Councillor Davey. I'm sorry. Councillor Davey votes for Councillor Galloway Seelock. Councillor Etherington votes for Councillor Galloway Seelock. Mayor Verbanovic votes for Galloway Seelock. Councillor Fernandez votes for Councillor Fernandez. Councillor Schneider votes for Councillor Galloway Seelock. Councillor Marsh votes for Galloway Seelock. And Councillor Gazzola votes for Fernandez.
Okay, and I'll do Vice Chair of Community and Infrastructure Services. Councillor Gazzola.
I nominate Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. Councillor Schneider.
I nominate Councillor Marsh.
Okay. Councillor Marsh, do you allow your name to stand? Okay. Councillor Fernandez, do you allow your name to stand? There are no other nominations. Nobody else has clicked in, Councillor Gazzola. Okay, well, that's fine. So we have vote for one of Fernandez or Marsh.
Okay, so Gazzola votes for Fernandez. Marsh votes for Marsh. Schneider votes for Marsh. Fernandez votes for Fernandez. Verbanovic votes for Marsh. Davy votes for Marsh. Galloway Seelock votes for Marsh. Etherington votes for Fernandez. Ionitis votes for Marsh. And Singh votes for Marsh.
Okay, so Councillor Marsh is the successful person as vice chair. And Councillor Galloway Seelock as chair for Community and Infrastructure Services. We'll now bounce over to Kitchener Housing Board of Directors. And you'll notice there were several pieces of correspondence from Kitchener Housing with respect to filling some of the vacancies. And Mr. McCall is here to explain some of that to us. Mr. McCall, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor, councillors, staff, and more staff. I'm going to be very brief. The reason I'm appearing here today is to kind of bring you up to speed on where we're at in our board recruitment. What has precipitated this is two of our board members are finishing their first third-year term on our board, and our board unanimously has suggested, and our staff has responded to you folks, that we would like both of those candidates appointed for their second third-year term. But I did want to add a little bit more because of a conversation I had back in June with Councillor Galloway Seelock on her suggestion that when we have vacancies, that if we had a list of skills that we were looking for on the board, that we should forward it either to your staff or to councillors individually, and to have you part of our recruitment team. That was a great idea, but we just didn't quite get to it in this time. And so we have gone through the city's recruitment process, and some of our board members have gone through their networks and have talked to a number of people. And as of the end of this year, not including the two that are before you tonight or today, we will have two vacancies at the end of this year. We are about 2/3 of the way through our recruitment process. We've had, I think, 5 applications from pre-qualified people, and we're just going through the process right now of conducting face-to-face interviews, getting their resumes. We have a skills matrix that we've just implemented in the last few months that have been sent to them. I do have a face-to-face meeting with one of them next week, and over the next several weeks we'll be meeting with the rest of them. And so to fill the two vacancies we will have at the end of December, we should have our recommendation to you folks. If not by your meeting in December, and I think you only have one, if not, then definitely by your first meeting in January. So we're a little behind in our schedule. It's the first time we've tried something this rigorous. And so that's it. We're working ahead. We're doing well. We're hoping you folks will ratify the two returning members, and that's all I got to say, unless you have questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And just for committee's information, that would be similar to the situation with the Center in the Square, where they have asked that we hold off until December to deal with their appointments, because they're doing a similar thing, working through their skills matrix as well as interviewing potential candidates. Councillor Fernandez?
I just want to make sure I'm clear that, Mr. McCall, you want us to approve these two that we have in front of us right now.
Am I permitted to mention the names?
Yeah, well, it's in correspondence that was in their package.
Okay, yeah.
Andre Chin and Preet Kohli.
Yes, correct. And that they would be coming into their second, third-year term.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So I'll move that.
Okay, so move that, and that the rest of the appointments come either in December or January?
Yes.
Okay. So that's been moved. Is there a seconder? Moved by Councillor Singh. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
That's it.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll now go back then to Finance and Corporate Services. And I'll take recommendations. Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, I'd like to nominate Councillor Gazzola, please.
Okay. Other nominations? Councillor Galloway Seelock.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Davey.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay. Councillor Davey, do you accept the nomination? Okay. Councillor Gazzola, do you accept the nomination? Okay. Thank you. So if committee can vote for one of Gazzola or Davey for Chair of Finance?
Okay, so Gazzola votes for Gazzola. Marsh votes for Davey. Schneider votes for Davey. Fernandez votes for Gazzola. Verbanovic votes for Davey. Galloway Seelock votes for Davey. Davey votes for Davey. Ioannidis votes for Davey. Etherington votes for Davey. And Singh votes for Davey.
Okay, so Councillor Davey, you're the Chair of the Finance Committee. I'll now take nominations for Vice Chair of Finance. Councillor Fernandez.
Councillor Gazzola, please.
Okay. Councillor Davey.
I'll nominate Councillor Schneider.
Councillor Schneider. Councillor Fernandez again.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. So, Councillor Schneider, do you accept the nomination? Okay. Councillor Gazzola, do you accept the nomination? Okay. So, if committee can vote for one of Gazzola or Schneider.
Gazzola votes for Gazzola. Marsh votes for Schneider. Schneider votes for Schneider. Fernandez votes for Gazzola. Verbanovic votes for Schneider. Galloway Seelock votes for Schneider. Davey votes for Schneider. Etherington votes for Schneider. Ioannidis votes for Schneider. And Singh votes for Schneider.
Councillor Schneider, you're the Vice Chair of Finance. We'll move on to Planning and Strategic Initiatives. Councillor Gazzola.
I nominate Councillor Yanetsky, who's not here, but I asked if he would be prepared to run, and he said yes.
Okay.
Can he, if he's not here? Why don't we just put him on the ballot?
Well, Councillor Gazzola, Councillor Yanetsky's not here. He hasn't sent me anything. I'll ask the clerk. Did you receive anything from Mr. Yanetsky to Councillor Yanetsky that he's willing to be on the ballot? Okay, so in fairness, I can't accept okay. Okay, go ahead, Councillor
I'm
Gazzola.
talking about fairness. I'll nominate Councillor Fernandez.
Okay, are there other nominations? Councillor Davey.
I'll nominate Councillor Singh.
Okay, Councillor Singh has been nominated. Are there other nominations? If not, Councillor Singh, do you accept the nomination? Okay, Councillor Fernandez, do you accept the nomination? Okay, so if people can vote for one of Fernandez or Singh.
Gazzola votes for Fernandez. Marsh votes for Singh. Schneider votes for Singh. Fernandez votes for Fernandez. Verbanovic votes for Singh. Galloway Seelock votes for Singh. Davy votes for Singh. Ioannidis votes for Singh. Singh votes for Singh. And Etherington votes for Singh.
Okay, Councillor Singh is the chair then of Planning and Strategic Initiatives, and we'll now go to vice chair of PNSI, Councillor Gazzola.
I'll nominate Councillor Fernandez.
Okay, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I'll nominate Councillor Ioannidis.
Okay. Thank you. Any other nominations? Councillor Ioannidis, do you accept? Yes, okay. Councillor Fernandez, do you accept? Okay. So folks can vote for one of Fernandez or Ioannidis.
Gazzola votes for Fernandez. Marsh votes for Ioannidis. Schneider votes for Ioannidis. Fernandez votes for Fernandez. Verbanovic votes for Ioannidis. Davy votes for Ioannidis. Galloway Seelock votes for Ioannidis. Etherington votes for Fernandez. Singh votes for Ioannidis. And Ioannidis votes for Ioannidis.
Okay, Councillor Ioannidis, you're the vice chair of Planning and Strategic Initiatives. We'll move on then to the Committee of Revision. And Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I nominate Councillor Ioannidis.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez.
I nominate Councillor Gazzola.
Okay. Councillor Ioannidis.
Nah, don't worry.
I was going to nominate Councillor Singh.
Okay. Any other nominations?
Just a question.
Yes.
How many need to sit on this committee?
So I see there were 4 previously and 1 alternate. Is it 3 that sit at any one time, or all 4 sit? So when the committee meets. Okay, so but we had 5 there before. We had 4 plus an alternate. Oh, you're saying at any one time 3 will sit with an alternate in attendance? Okay, so it sounds like we need at least 1 more. Councillor Marsh.
I nominate Councillor Schneider and Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. So, Councillor Any other nominations, first of all? Councillor Fernandez, are you prepared to sit? No. No? Okay. Councillor Schneider, are you prepared to sit? Yes. Okay. Councillor Singh, are you prepared to sit? Councillor Gazzola, are you prepared to sit? You were there before. Councillor Ioannidis, are you prepared to sit? Okay, so there's 4. Do we need an alternate still, or 4 is enough? Okay. Councillor Galloway Seelock's prepared to stay as alternate. Okay, so it would be Councillor Ioannidis, Gazzola, Singh, Schneider, and Councillor Galloway Seelock as an alternate. Somebody want to move that? Moved by Councillor Davies, seconded by Councillor Ioannidis. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. GRAC. Councillor Marsh.
I nominate Councillor Galloway Seelock for a time period when she's ready to start.
Okay. Councillor Gazzola.
I nominate Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez.
I just have a question. Can you clarify what you mean by when she's ready to start?
Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, at this time, I don't feel like I have, with what's going on in my personal life, the time to commit to this specific committee. So I don't know that there's a specific timeline on that, but I'd be willing, when I'm able to, step back in if that is something that I can do. So there's no definitive timeline on that.
So,
I enjoy sitting on that committee, but at this time it just isn't the time that it is at Thursdays at 1:30 isn't fitting into my outside commitments.
So then shouldn't we be putting some nominations forward of people who can to take the whole term?
If that's what people would like to do, then I'm open to that option as well.
I think that's important.
Councillor Marsh.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so any other nominations? Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, Councillor Gazzola.
Okay. Councillor Singh.
Sorry, just a question, and I see that Councillor Galloway Seelock has certain passion for this committee. She's served it a long time, and I support her there, but obviously because of her obligations, can we not do something similar to like before, where someone else is appointed, and when she's able to, and then she replaces that person?
Councillor Galloway Seelock.
I just don't have a time frame on that. Like last time I did, and it was with regards to having Logan, so that's kind of why I put that time frame on it. This time I unfortunately don't. I would like to be on it, but it's just not working for me right now. So if Councillor Fernandez or Councillor Gazzola would like to step in for the time being, that would be great, and I can step aside.
Okay, so I'll come around and ask everyone if they'd like to leave their name to stand. Councillor Gazzola.
Down and give my support to Councillor Fernandez for the long haul.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez?
Yes, I will stand.
Okay. Councillor Galloway Seelock?
I will support Councillor Fernandez for the long haul as well.
Okay. So Councillor Fernandez then will be the rep on GRAC. We will now move on to Center in the Square. That will actually be coming back. Kitchener Housing, that'll be coming back over and above the ones that we have approved. We will now deal with Kitchener Hydro, the council reps are appointed through to the end of May. So are we looking to deal with beyond May today, or are we dealing with those in June or in May? Okay. And I'll note that we have a memo from Hydro pertaining to Mr. Phillips and Mr. Schnarr continuing, and we ratify those. So what's council's will with respect to the council ones? Councillor Davey.
I think we should just deal with it now, and
Okay.
I'm prepared to move Hydro's recommendations as well as Councillors Marsh and Schneider.
Marsh and Schneider are being nominated. Okay, Councillor Singh.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was going to nominate the same as Councillor Davey, so I'm okay with that.
Okay, Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, Councillor Gazzola, and I guess I can't nominate Councillor Yanetsky because he's not here to accept. Is that correct?
That's correct. He didn't provide any input.
Okay. Just that one.
Okay, Councillor Gazzola.
I will nominate Councillor Fernandez, but I'd like to ask a question. The members that are there now, when did they start to sit on that board?
On June the 1st.
June the 1st?
Yes.
So did some members of council sit for longer than a year?
There was a cycle where I think some people sat for 18 months, I believe.
And who were they?
Can't remember. Councillor Galloway Seelock? Okay. So you sat for 18 months and then these guys sat for 18 months? Okay.
So now we're going to appoint someone from what to what?
So it was 15, yes, thank you. So you'll recall, Councillor Gazzola, that the board came to us with some governance change recommendations.
No, you don't have to go through that. We're now going to appoint someone from where to when?
From June 1st, 2018 through to December 31st, 2018.
And what happens in an election year?
What do you mean, what happens in an election year?
You're going to nominate, this is for 2 council representatives.
Correct.
What if they're not here on December the 2nd?
So can someone from staff help me? I think the Hydro ones still go through to the end of December, but I might be wrong on that. Maybe they end November 30th then. Madam Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're just double checking with somebody. I don't have my notes in front of me regarding this board. I respectfully ask maybe we can come back to this one while staff is checking on what the board term will be for the council members.
Okay. Councillor Day. Okay, if you want to.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Yeah, no, I do recall when we dealt with this not long ago. I think the intention was that they be appointed for 12 months unless they aren't reelected, in which case the new council would deal with the vacancy if one of the members that was appointed was not reelected.
So we're basically dealing with a 3 or 4 month appointment here.
Unless the member is reelected, then they would automatically fulfill their term.
Which is the assumption we have to work on.
Sorry?
Which is the assumption we have to work on. No one's guaranteed a...
No,
there's no assumption. It's just that's how it was originally envisioned, and I'm just recalling how we dealt with it at that time.
So staff can double check. We can come back to this one. I mean, at the end of the day, the appointments. I'm recollecting a little bit of what Councillor Davey is saying, that I think there was some clause there that said if you weren't elected, you ceased to be the representative. The challenge, as you know, Councillor Gazzola, is we have the difference between council terms and the Corporations Act and the terms that apply to a board. that goes from June 1st to May 31st. And that's what we're trying to work through.
I totally realized, do we have a choice on what our fiscal year end is for Hydro? Is that a choice or is that a provincial?
No, that is what our fiscal year is,
No,
and our board appointments are now reflecting that, and that was something that council approved earlier this year or last year.
Yeah, well, if council approved it, it must be right.
Well, that's certainly the will of council, which is the democratic process, as you know.
That's it exactly.
Okay, we'll come back to that one. We'll move on now to the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery Board of Directors. Nominations, please. Councillor Gazzola.
I'm going to nominate Councillor Fernandez.
Okay, Councillor Fernandez.
I was going to nominate Councillor Marsh.
Okay. Any other nominations? Councillor Marsh.
I'm happy to give someone else the opportunity if they want it, but I'm also happy to take it on to continue into my 4th year representing council at KW Art Gallery. So either, if someone else wants it, that's no problem.
Okay, Councillor Fernandez? You're declining. So, Councillor Marsh, you're accepting then? Okay, that would then be Councillor Marsh. Again, have we had any indication from Councillor Yanetsky with respect to Grand River Hospital? Okay. Councillor Fernandez?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Gazzola, please.
Okay. Is there any other nominations? Councillor Gazzola?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Etherington.
Okay. Any other nominations? Councillor Etherington?
I respectfully decline, Mr.
Okay, well, I'm not at that point yet, Councillor Etherington. Any other nominations? Okay, Councillor Etherington has indicated he's declining. Councillor Gazzola?
At board for 8 years, 10 years, I will decline and give someone else the opportunity.
Okay. If we, I mean, I guess one option is if there is nobody today and it remains vacant, we can fill it at the next meeting, and if Councillor Yanetsky still wants to be on that board, we can consider him at that point in time. But we just can't deal with it today. Are there any other nominations? Councillor Davey?
I'll nominate Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez?
I was going to go with your suggestion, but I'll leave it.
Okay. Councillor Galloway-Seelock? You want to be on it? Okay. So, any other nominations? Councillor Gazzola?
No, I...
Okay, Councillor Galloway-Seelock then would become the individual on that board. Homer Watson House, Councillor Gazzola.
I nominate Councillor Fernandez.
Okay, any other nominations? Councillor Ioannidis.
I nominate Councillor Etherington.
Sorry, Councillor who?
Etherington.
Any other nominations? Councillor Etherington. Okay, Councillor Fernandez? Okay, so it's Councillor Fernandez then on that board. Horticultural Society. Nominations. Councillor Marsh.
I nominate Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. Any other nominations? Councillor Gazzola.
I nominate Councillor Marsh.
Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, I nominate Councillor Schneider.
Okay. Councillor Schneider, do you accept the nomination? Okay, Councillor Marsh. Okay, Councillor Fernandez? Okay, thank you. So Councillor Fernandez continues on that one. We'll now go to Huron Natural Area. Nominations, please. Councillor Gazzola.
I nominate Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. Councillor Ioannidis.
I nominate Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Okay. Any other nominations? Councillor Fernandez.
I nominate Councillor Singh.
Councillor Singh. Any other nominations? Okay, if not, Councillor Singh.
I think I'll decline, as I have interest in a couple other committees that are coming up.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galloway Seelock?
Yes, I will accept.
Okay, Councillor Fernandez.
I'm declining.
Okay. We need one more person for that one, so I'll open up the floor for nominations again. Councillor Galloway Seelock.
I will nominate Councillor Bill Ioannidis.
Okay. Any other nominations? Councillor Gazzola.
I nominate Councillor Etherington.
Okay. And Councillor Fernandez.
I'll nominate Councillor Gazzola.
Okay. And I'll go through Councillor Gazzola. Okay. Councillor Etherington. Councillor Ioannidis. Okay. So we have 3 people going for that. Councillor Galloway Seelock, Councillor Ioannidis, and Councillor Gazzola. And you need to vote for 2, please.
Marsh votes for Galloway Seelock and Gazzola.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Marsh votes for Galloway Seelock and Gazzola. Schneider votes for Galloway Seelock and Gazzola. Gazzola votes for Gazzola and Ioannidis. Fernandez votes for Ioannidis and Gazzola. Verbanovic votes for Galloway Seelock and Ioannidis. Galloway Seelock votes for Galloway Seelock and Ioannidis. Davey votes for Ioannidis and Galloway Seelock. Ioannidis votes for Galloway Seelock and Ioannidis. Etherington votes for Galloway Seelock and Gazzola. And Singh votes for Galloway Seelock and Ioannidis.
Clerks can confirm for me, but it appears to be Galloway Seelock and Ioannidis. Okay. Kitchener and Bloom nominations. Councillor Gazzola.
I'll nominate Councillor Yvonne Fernandez.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ioannidis.
I nominate Councillor Singh. Can I do 2 nominations?
Sure, go ahead.
And Councillor Etherington.
Sorry, Councillor. Okay. Any other nominations? Councillor Marsh.
I nominate Councillor Schneider.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'd like to nominate Councillor Davy.
Okay. Any other nominations? Councillor Davy, do you accept? Okay, Councillor Schneider? Councillor Schneider? I do. Okay. Councillor Etherington? Okay, Councillor Singh? And Councillor Fernandez?
Yes.
Okay, so we need to vote for two of Fernandez, Singh, or Schneider. I'll do it at the end.
Gazzola votes for Fernandez.
So long, I've got to get my little tally thing going. Okay, go ahead.
So Gazzola votes for Fernandez and Snyder. Marsh votes for Fernandez and Schneider. Schneider votes for Singh and Schneider. Fernandez votes for Fernandez and Schneider. Verbanovic votes for Fernandez and Schneider. Galloway Seelock votes for Schneider and Singh. Singh
Hold on. Sorry, Galloway Seelock?
Schneider and Singh.
Okay.
Singh votes for Schneider and Fernandez. Davy votes for Schneider and Singh. Ioannidis votes for Singh and Schneider. And Etherington votes for Singh and Schneider.
And Etherington votes for... So if I'm correct, Councillor Schneider is there. And there's a tie between Councillor Fernandez and Councillor Singh. Correct? So we have to vote again for the second one. Councillor Gazzola, do you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we have to vote for one of Fernandez or Singh.
Gazzola votes for Fernandez. Gazzola votes for Fernandez. Marsh votes for Fernandez. Schneider votes for Fernandez. Fernandez votes for Fernandez. Verbanovic votes for Fernandez. Galloway Seelock votes for Singh. Davy votes for Singh. Ioannidis votes for Singh. Etherington votes for Singh. And Singh votes for Singh.
So we have a tie vote again. So at that point, can we have 3 councillors on that? Why is it too much? Councillor Fernandez?
There's already been a fair bit of discussion around Kitchener and Bloom's committee about 2 councillors being on the board. Yes, because we're coming into an election year, and the fact that Kitchener-Bloom's is a nominating committee of gardens. There's been discussion around whether council should be participating in a committee that nominates residential communities. So that's been a concern.
Well, that's a separate issue from sitting on the committee.
But as well as they're concerned with the heaviness of council on the committee. I mean, you can certainly check with either the chairs or one of the long-standing members in the past. But having attended just about every committee meeting, that's the sense we've been talking about it.
Okay, Councillor Marsh?
We can wait.
Yep, sorry, you... Go ahead, Councillor Fernandez.
We can wait until we have a full council to vote on this again if we need to.
Or, I mean, the alternative is, quite frankly, pick a name from a hat or toss a coin. Councillor Marsh.
I just wanted to understand, when the winners are chosen, are the council members on the committee a part of the decision-making? Okay.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I think council's heard from one perspective, so that's why I keyed in. I think there was discussion on the committee, again, aspect of nominations and receiving perhaps too many nominations from councillors themselves. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but aspect of there's too many councillors on committee, I don't think I got that sense yet, but there is discussion about the nomination process and the aspect of picking out those that would win. I didn't participate simply because, again, being a councillor as well and having nominated residents in my ward, so I purposely didn't choose to nominate. So that's something decision a person can make on their own accord. So just wanted to give my perspective of that committee.
Councillor Galloway-Seelock?
My 2 cents may be just to, I know it doesn't please everybody, but go down to 1, because that's what we used to have, was only 1 person on the committee. So I don't know. We had a 1 nominee that was supported with 10 votes, and so that might be a route I would entertain this time around.
One question, if I can ask, is how many non-council members are on the committee? Can either the councillors who are there tell me? Councillor Fernandez?
I believe there was 7 at the last meeting.
Okay, so roughly 7. I do think probably going to 3 would be a little heavy with only 7 citizen members there. Councillor Marsh?
Well, considering that the 2 that we're having trouble finding a majority vote for have been the experienced ones in the past, I propose that we have all 3, but that under the understanding that at any given time there be at least 2, and that they work it out so that we make sure that council is not overstepping, but that the experienced councillors and those who have a passion for this committee not be left out of it. So what I'm proposing is that we nominate all 3 and that they work it out offline.
Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Mayor Vivanovic. Perhaps maybe if what I'm hearing is that there is a potential for bias in the selection of the gardens, that the councillors are not part of the selection committee.
Okay. I think that would be a decision of the group.
Yeah.
Councillor Singh?
Yeah, I don't think we want to discuss the terms of reference of the committee. That would be left to them to decide. I'm comfortable with what Councillor Marsh has suggested. I think having two representations, I've served in the committee for a few years alone, and of course, there's council obligations. Sometimes you can't make all committees. I think it's served well having two councillors on it. And again, my essence was that I think it was well received by having that level of representation on the committee. My only other suggestion would be that instead of having perhaps three, that if there is a tie vote, we either vote again or wait till we have all members of council. But I'm okay with Councillor Marsh's if others are agreeable.
Councillor Fernandez?
I'm not comfortable with Councillor Marsh's suggestion. I think that it starts to muddle who's going to attend and who's not going to attend and what happens if all three of us are there. So I would like to put forward a recommendation that we vote on this committee when we have a full council.
Okay. Procedurally, I'm just trying to figure out, should we be leaving it, or should we be doing what would normally happen if there's a tie? Councillor Davey, you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I think we're blowing this out of proportion a little bit. I think we should the rules are in place that my understanding is that if there is a tie, a name is drawn out of a hat, if you want to add an alternate as the third person for the person whose name isn't drawn, I think that's the way that we're supposed to deal with things. I think deferring because a member didn't show up, and my understanding is he didn't contact the mayor or the clerk staff on this, barring some emergency situation. I'm not sure why that person shouldn't end up having the deciding vote, and why we should bend the rules to that. So I would put forward, in lieu of, I suppose you have to vote on Councillor Fernandez's motion first, but in lieu of that, we put the names in a hat, and the person whose name isn't drawn is put down as an alternate, and they can work it out after that.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I would like to support where Councillor Fernandez is going. It's unfortunate that not every member of council is here, and the member of council that is missing has participated in the past, and is, and the fact is that we have postponed a number of other appointments. So, in fairness to that, one digression by the one member of council, could we not just add that to the other list of postponements that we have in front of us and wait till everyone's here, and when we have 11, we don't have that problem?
Well, to be clear, the only ones we've deferred are the two external boards that have asked for deferrals.
All right, well, I want to be clear. I don't want to be unclear whenever I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gazzola. So does the bylaw say we would, in the event of a tie, do the hat thing, or? I'm asking for direction from the clerk, Councillor Gazzola. She did, and I'm asking for direction from the clerk. Councillor Gazzola, please. Thank you. Mr. Budd.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is no default per se in the procedural bylaw, but through Robert's rules, we can default into picking the name from a hat.
Okay. Is that what we would do in a normal election? Okay. So I think that would be my inclination, is that we're consistent with that. In the absence, I know there was one other year when Councillor Yanetsky wasn't here for nominations, and he did leave some ahead of time, which for whatever reason chose not to do this time. So I don't think it would be appropriate to defer for that reason. And there is an accepted procedure in that regard. So with that, I guess I would ask the clerk to put two names in a hat and to draw one of them. Well, I'll let you guys. Just hang on, Councillor Marsh.
So can I just ask, we have a basket. So are we saying that whoever's name is picked out of the hat is the second member of council on the committee?
That is correct.
But that the person whose name is not drawn would be officially the alternate, so that if both nominees would not...
We're only having two.
Okay. Well, all right. That's a shame, but...
Well, what we heard was that there's already, that it's a small committee and there's already two members of council. Mm-hmm. And there's some concerns around the numbers of members of council on it already.
Okay.
So with that, yes.
Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. So it's Councillor Schneider and Fernandez. We'll now go to the Multicultural Center Board of Directors. Nominations, please. Councillor Ioannidis.
I nominate Councillor Etherington.
Okay. Councillor Singh.
I was going to do the same.
Councillor Schneider.
I nominate Councillor Marsh.
Councillor Fernandez.
I nominate Councillor Gazzola.
Any other nominations? Councillor Gazzola. Councillor Marsh. Councillor Etherington. Okay, so we have two who are nominated, Councillor Etherington and Councillor Gazzola, and we'll be voting for one. Go ahead, Councillor Marsh.
Having sat on this committee for 3 years, it's not just AGM only that was explained to me. I don't know, I don't remember that this was how it was defined in years past, because typically they have monthly meetings on Wednesday evenings, and typically as a non-voting board member, I've been expected to be there at least for part of the meeting, if not the whole meeting. So I just want that reflected in the minutes.
Okay, so it should say monthly on the sheets in the future. So in light of that, I'll just ask again, Councillor Etherington, you're still willing to let your name stand? And Councillor Gazzola, you're still willing to let your name stand? Okay, people can vote for one of Etherington or Gazzola.
Gazzola votes for Gazzola. Marsh votes for Gazzola. Schneider votes for Etherington. Fernandez votes for Gazzola. Verbanovic votes for Etherington. Davey votes for Etherington. Galloway-Sealock votes for Gazzola. Etherington votes for Etherington. Ioannidis votes for Gazzola, and Singh votes for Etherington.
Okay, I lost track somewhere, but I'm guessing by the giggling, it's a tie vote again. Okay, so I guess in the absence of Councillor Gazzola.
I'm prepared to step down and allow Councillor Etherington the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Etherington, then, you're the representative on Multicultural. I'll take Oktoberfest next. Councillor Singh.
Nominate Councillor Ioannidis.
Okay. Councillor Davy.
I'll nominate Councillor Schneider.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez.
I'll nominate Councillor Gazzola. And a question of clarification, in the past, there's only been one member of councillor on this. Did we change the terms of reference?
No, it's actually been two for many, many years.
Because when I was on it, I was the only one who attended meetings, so I thought maybe there was only one then.
Okay, any other nominations? So I have 3 nominations right now. Councillor Gazzola, do you accept? You're already on Heritage? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Schneider? Councillor Schneider? Councillor Ioannidis? Okay, so it's Councillor Schneider and Councillor Ioannidis. WLU Board of Governors. Councillor Davy.
I'll move Councillor Singh.
Okay. Any other nominations? Councillor Singh, congratulations, you're on Laurier. Yes, we'll go back to Hydro. If I can ask the clerk for clarification on the council terms.
Through you, Mayor, the Kitchener Power Corporation appointment is for 1 year. If the member is not re-elected, we do have an automatic resignation form that the elected members to the board this evening will sign for us. And in the case that they're not elected, then they will be removed from the board at that time.
Okay, yes, that sounds very familiar now. Thank you for that clarification. So up till now, we had Councillors Marsh, Schneider, Gazzola, and Fernandez nominated. Councillor Fernandez.
I decline.
Okay, Councillor Gazzola. Okay, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Marsh. Okay, so we're voting for 2 of 3, Marsh, Schneider, and Gazzola.
Gazzola votes for Gazzola. Marsh.
Well, you have to vote for 2. You can't vote for yourself twice. You do have to vote for 2. No plunking.
Gazzola votes for Gazzola and Marsh. Marsh votes for Marsh and Schneider. Schneider votes for Marsh and Schneider. Fernandez votes for Marsh and Gazzola. Verbanovic votes for Schneider and Marsh. Galloway Seelock votes for Schneider and Marsh. Davy votes for Marsh and Schneider. Ioannidis votes for Marsh and Schneider. Etherington votes for Marsh and Schneider. And Singh votes for Marsh and Schneider.
Okay, so it'll be Councillor Marsh and Councillor Schneider beginning June 1st in terms of the Hydro Board. So I think, Madam Clerk, we've been through all. Oh, okay. You mean the Dave Schneider and Jim Phillips? Yes. Okay. Okay. Moved by Councillor Davey. Councillor Fernandez.
Oh, I was just going to move it.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So I think that gets us through all of our appointments, correct? Okay, hang on. I got it. Thanks. Okay, so there is a recommendation that Samantha Hossack be appointed for Civic Center Heritage Conservation District until November 30th. Somebody want to move that? Moved by Councillor Fernandez. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. I think that is it then. So motion, actually no, we're not adjourning yet. We're going to move into our strategic session. Okay, just 1 minute. I think I've already done one, but... Okay, we'll move on then to our strategic planning session on Crosby. And who is kicking it off? Natalie? Okay, wonderful.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about our 30-year-old zoning bylaw and the process that we're doing to update that 30-year-old zoning bylaw. Brandon wanted me to mention that this would be a scintillating conversation, an hour and a half to talk about zoning regulations, and those of us along this side do truly believe that zoning does touch every property in the city, so it is an important topic that we all need to have an understanding of what we're doing when we're recommending certain things and making certain decisions. So that's part of the reason why we're here today. I'll start off just by reminding members of council where we've been. So in 2014, council endorsed a process for the comprehensive review of the city's zoning bylaw, and we launched that publicly in June of 2014. Since March of 2015, we have tabled a complete first draft of a new zoning bylaw. We've done that through a series of 5 components, starting in March of 2015, and ending with a first draft of the residential zones in May of this year. Since the launch of the project in 2014, staff has conducted an extensive consultation with property owners and stakeholders. And I just want to highlight a few of the stats since we're incredibly proud of the process that we've conducted to date and one that we will be continuing over the next coming months or years. Some unique aspects to our comprehensive process in this city that none of our neighboring municipalities are doing is that we have sent specific notification letters to every property owner in the city whose properties we have proposed to rezone to date, And that amounts to just over 3,500 letters sent to date. We've had individual meetings with property owners and stakeholders, and we've held 56 of those to date as well. We held 9 open houses over the last 3 years, where we had 415 people in attendance in total at those open houses. We've held 6 presentations and discussions with our home builder industry, and we've done 2 presentations to our KW Association of Realtors. And this is what we've heard so far. We've received about 1,400 individual comments to date. Staff is reading each and every comment. Staff is responding in writing to each and every comment that we've received. The graph in front of you shows the percent of comments by zone. You can see that approximately 40% of the comments that we've received related to the proposed Natural Heritage Conservation Zone, and 20% of them related to the proposed employment zones. What we've heard so far, in summary, is that there's support for our new parking regulations. There's support for the principle of including parking maximums in a zoning bylaw, as well as requirements for bicycle parking and electric vehicle parking. There's support for the broad range of permitted uses that we're proposing in our commercial zones. There's support for the inclusion of general regulations related to bonusing. There is support for the principle of the Natural Heritage Conservation Zone. However, what we heard is that there's concerns about where it applies. We received a number of questions and concerns about the concept of legal non-conforming. And we also received questions and concerns about what is meant by the existing use floodplain zone. And finally, we did receive a number of concerns about the range of permitted uses in the proposed employment zones. Over the next 6 or so months, we intend to do the following. There will be a statutory public meeting that will be held in front of Council in the spring of 2018. And in the staff report, I wrote a summary of what is intended to be included in that final draft zoning bylaw, as well as what will not be included. At this time, it's proposed that that draft zoning bylaw will not include the residential zones and will not include zoning in specific areas, and that list is in the staff report. Additionally, early next year, we will commence consultation on those residential zones. We will also commence consultation on the recommendations related to zoning in the Rienz area as well. The reason that we're here today is to begin a dialogue with members of council on key items that we anticipate that you will hear at that statutory public meeting in the spring of next year. We know that a new zoning bylaw means change, especially when we're dealing with a zoning bylaw that's been in place for 30 years. We know that change is hard, and we've heard that from property owners and stakeholders over the last 3 years. Change is important in order to realize the vision of our new official plan, in order to realize the vision of the regional official plan, and to implement provincial policy. We understand that some decisions on this new zoning bylaw will be difficult for council to make, and we wanted to start the conversation now to answer any questions that you have about the content that we intend to table in 2018. So it's my understanding that we have approximately an hour for this conversation. In the staff report, I included 3 discussion questions, so I'll turn it back over to the mayor now to facilitate that conversation.
Before we go into the discussion questions, I'll ask if folks have any questions of you. And then we'll go into questions 1, 2, and 3. Councillor Davies, is this questions of staff? You'll hold off. Councillor Ioannidis, questions of staff? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. The question I want to ask is, when the time comes when this is all close to being finalized, are we going to get a breakdown on each property in each ward and which property owners disagree with this?
Through the chair, as part of that statutory public meeting staff report, it's our intention to provide a summary of all comments received, and typically what we do is we'll provide the property address and a summary of their comments, and then a summary of the staff response.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess if we can group them by ward, that would be helpful.
Sorry.
I don't know if you heard that. I said if you can group them by ward when you bring the report, that would be helpful.
Through the chair, that yes, we can do that. Also, that will only be a summary of the comments that we've received to date. So the statutory public meeting, the nature of those meetings is that you will hear directly from property owners and consultants and stakeholders. So there may be additional comments that are raised through that process as well.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Councillor Fernandez, questions of staff? Okay, go ahead.
So I attended a couple of the initial zoning public meetings, and a lot of it was around the natural areas. How have we been able to put some of these concerns to rest? Have we been able to explain it to them, to the residents, in a way that they see the logic to the designation and the zoning change?
So through the chair, that is one of our discussion questions. So if you don't mind, we could defer that and talk about it as part of that. And I have some additional information I can share as part of that discussion question.
Okay, because I mean, you made an example of something that's in my ward, so and I'm very familiar with that particular street. So I just wanted to have an understanding how we were dealing with that. But if you're going to answer that in our discussion, that's perfect.
Councillor Marsh, questions of staff? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just recalling that last election, one of the hot topics was around neighborhood markets, and what we knew at that time was that it would be addressed in Crosby, and now that residential zones will not be completed in this term of council, I'm just wondering in what way, if at all, are we addressing that question? When and how can we make it easier for neighborhood markets to occur within residential areas?
So through the chair, as part of the first draft, we tabled some regulations that we put in our general section to deal with the permission of temporary farmers markets. As part of the final draft, we're still working through the appropriate tool that would best be used to ensure that they are supported more globally. And it may be at the end of the day that zoning isn't the appropriate tool to do that. We're working through some consultation that's occurring through the city's neighborhood strategy and implementation of those action items to ensure that the permissions on temporary farmers markets are more widely open. And it may be that zoning is not the appropriate mechanism to do that.
Okay, so if we don't have to wait for zoning changes to be implemented, then perhaps in a different venue we can discuss ways to make it clear to the public what our direction is on that sooner than later.
So through the chair, because we received comments on temporary farmers markets through our consultation process, we will be responding to those comments as part of this prior to the final draft. It may be through those comments, once we work through the details, that the response is, a package of information that we can point them to as part of the neighborhood strategy to tell them how they're being permitted and why it's not necessary to regulate them as a use in zoning going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. May, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. By the end of this year, the city will be launching a new neighborhood market program in cooperation with Kitchener Market. So it will address zoning, but it will also address, you'll see a report coming to you soon on licensing and licensing costs. And so by the end of this year, we'll have a very comprehensive program that we can communicate to the public.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So obviously from the information you're giving, we've heard from a significant amount of people so far. What has been the the sentiment after the meeting? I'm sure people are shocked or surprised or concerned if there's change proposed for their property, but once they met with staff, did you see a level of acceptance thereafter, or is there still resistance? And I'm talking about in generality.
So through the chair, it depends on the topic that we're discussing. However, more conversations are always better. we can provide a better understanding and have, that two-way dialogue to try to reach consensus as much as possible about issues. We are trying as hard as we can to resolve as many of the issues as possible in advance of that statutory public meeting. That's why we sent letters out to make sure that people are notified. That's why we're doing individual discussions. That's why we're sending the response letters. In response to some of those letters that we've sent, we've had additional conversations one-on-one with property owners. We've met with groups of property owners to try to resolve concerns. It's our hope that we can resolve as much as possible, but I think as I indicated in the staff report, at the time of the statutory public meeting, at some point we have a professional opinion to put forward for you to consider, and it may be in some cases that doesn't jive with some of the concerns that are continued to be raised by property owners. And
well, I appreciate that, but that's why I was trying to understand the essence of that process of engagement with the residents. I hear that there is a aspect of resolution or effort of resolution. Is that correct? Is that really what staff are endeavoring to do, or is it more of establishing what the policy is or the position that staff have taken?
Through the chair, staff is always open for that dialogue. And part of it is to help people understand the direction that we are given through council-approved official plans, for example, or regional official plans or provincial policy. In other cases, we do gain a perspective from talking with the property owner to understand what actually is on the ground. And what we do with that information is we do go back and we revisit and see if there is room for some movement.
I'm glad to hear that part. Okay, good. The other thing, more general, feedback from the overall community. Is there a survey or aspect of online engagement that's still available or will be leading up to the public meeting?
Through the chair, we haven't done online engagement to date. However, we're working with corporate communications to develop a communication strategy as we roll out the implementation of the residential zones, and that's definitely something we can explore as we, examine those 50,000 properties.
Because this is going to be impactful, not just the individual property owners, but it defines the future shape and look of our city. So I think more inclusive public engagement would be prudent. So.
Councillor Davey, you have additional questions? Okay, go ahead.
Actually, my first question is on this. Just with respect to the question number one, the legal non-conforming, there is an issue, I'm sure you're aware, on the easterly side of my ward with the new car dealerships that have all just been erected. And I understand the idea is that the use is continued, but still there's fear there, and I guess from the private sector perspective, it seems a little strange that, or strange is putting it nicely, that we just had millions and millions of dollars invested there on a bunch of purpose-built car dealership structures, and now we're coming to them saying we don't really want car dealerships here. So I do get the long-term vision, but I guess the question is, when we're looking at these comprehensive zone changes, can we take into account I guess I would say the newness of the existing infrastructure that's built there? And I'm just looking at some of the issues here. I don't want to ask too many questions in a row, but it says that it would trigger if there is proposed change use in the property. Now, is there a time frame for that? If, for example, an Acura dealer moved out and there was a temporary use, could we make sure that that's like a 3-year use instead of a very short-term use so that they don't lose the value in the property? I think that's enough questions for now.
So, through the chair, if I can just give a brief description of what legal nonconforming is, and just to bring everybody up to speed on that, and then
certainly, sure. And then, we will be going through each of the discussion questions one by one.
So, through the chair, would you like to get into the first discussion question now?
And then, okay. That'll be helpful to inform people's opinions.
So the context that I've highlighted in the staff report provides an overview of what is meant by legal nonconforming. And essentially, legal nonconforming is a necessary byproduct of a new zoning bylaw. The new zoning bylaw is meant to implement our new official plan, the region's official plan, and provincial policy. With that, there will be some instances of legal nonconforming across the city. Legal nonconforming essentially is a use that legally exists today under our current zoning framework. And on the effective date, so whenever council passes the new zoning bylaw, those uses won't continue to be permitted. That establishes them as legal and then non-conforming with the new bylaw. The other rule generally is that the use must be continuous. So the use isn't tied to the owner of the property. The business can change hands, and that legal non-conforming status will still be maintained. It just needs to be continuous. And you had asked a question, Councillor Davey, about the nature of continuous, and that can be subjective, and there's a bunch of case law that determines what continuous means. But it is something that we'd have to work through on a property-specific basis to determine what continuous is and how that can be maintained. Essentially what happens to properties that are legal non-conforming is that the new zoning bylaw will have no effect on their daily operations of their business or the use of the property. They can continue to enjoy their property as they do right now. Because zoning bylaws are forward-thinking, they regulate the future use of the property. They don't apply retroactively. The new zoning bylaw will only apply if a property owner comes in and wants to do an addition to their building, or they want to demolish the building and do something completely new on the property. If they want to expand their legal non-conforming building on the property, the Provincial Planning Act provides for a process that we can consider those through, and they would actually go through Committee of Adjustment. So not only are those properties not kind of stale dated, but they have a process to go through our Committee of Adjustment where we can evaluate them on a site-specific basis.
Okay, so if they do want to add, so supposing there's a newer purpose-built structure there, and they do want to add an additional structure, they won't necessarily be denied or declined that. It would go through, be a process for that to be determined.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. Has there ever been, is it possible, I know it's difficult to get property owners to specifically agree sometimes to these things, but has there ever been a notion that a property owner, if a subsequent property owner has a different use, that they would essentially sign off on the rights to the old uses? In other words, getting them to agree as opposed to enforcing it upon them.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Sure. So supposing, I guess this is how I'm looking at it. Supposing that, or I'll use that same example, that we purpose-built a BMW dealership in that location and it's brand new and the city wants to change the zoning. Now the difficulty is if the owner of that property wanted to sell it to another one, and I understand that those rights continue along, there could still be a perceived loss of value in terms of if someone was going to move into that building, they might use that continued use. So I mean, I'm thinking of examples like, I know there was a dealership on Ottawa Street that was temporarily closed down. I think it was actually a political office at one point, which is a pretty short-term use. I just think that there would be issues in trying to sell that, have that continuation, because who's going to want to adopt a different use when the use could change and they would lose that value? Do you follow my line of thinking?
So I think so. Through the chair, I think, continuous can mean a couple of things. One being that the actual use, so the car dealership example, never ceases to exist and is always maintained. The other aspect of continuous is that, if for some reason they had to discontinue that use, say for renovations or upgrades or whatnot, and they weren't operating for a number of months, as long as they demonstrated they had the intent to continue that use, that also satisfies that condition of legal nonconforming.
Okay. I'll leave it for now. Thank you.
Councillor Etherington, questions?
One question, Mr. Chair. Ms. Goss, you mentioned the response to reduced parking spaces, and you said it was generally positive. Can you tell me if that response was from residents or from developers?
Through the chair, it was from both.
Both. Thank you.
Okay, that appears to be all of the questions, so we'll get into the discussion questions now. First one then is questions, thoughts on certain properties becoming legal non-conforming to help achieve new directions, objectives of provincial, regional, and city policies. Any thoughts, feedback? Councillor Fernandez.
So I just want to make sure that the definition is something that the average citizen would understand. Because you yourself had to repeat it to us a couple of times before it kind of sunk in, even for me as well. Because I think that the whole terminology legal non-conforming could be confused for people that say, all right, well, right now it's being used as light industrial, but it's going to change to commercial. I know that the C zoning and the employment are very close in definition in terms of what uses can happen there. Is there a way that or do you see that this is something that you'll be having to discuss over and over and over again every time a property like that changes hands with a new owner? Because, like you said, the zone stays with the building and the site, but not the owner can change.
So through the chair, I think that the more opportunities we have to talk to as many people as possible about the concept of legal nonconforming, the better. It isn't an easy concept to understand. We have developed a series of frequently asked questions, and we did that right at the start because we knew legal nonconforming was going to occur with the changes that we were proposing in the new bylaw. It is something that's been available on our project website since day one. It is a conversation that we've been having through the open houses, through the individual conversations. It is also something that we included when we sent out all of those individual letters. They did get a copy of those frequently asked questions, so they were made aware of the concept of legal nonconforming. In surveying a number of municipalities in Ontario and elsewhere, when they do a new zoning bylaw, this is one of the top comments that is raised through their processes. So we can learn a lot from each other in terms of how to properly explain this in a way that's understood by property owners and stakeholders.
Right. So as you were talking, I wrote this down, and I think that is sometimes can be the perception of what citizens may think, especially if you're changing a land use from a golf course, for example, which is recreational land and sometimes can be natural area, could be hazard land, into a development. Would that be a legal non-conforming situation, or would that be a completely different zone change and fall under other guidelines?
Through the chair, as I understand your example, my understanding would be that would be a zone change,
a complete
process.
Zone change. Okay. So the other example would be if, if something was to change from a light industrial to a commercial that maybe involved a bakery. Is that the kind of thing that people, or conversely, so it was a bakery and now it's a light industrial?
So I think the best way that I can think of to explain it is the example that's on the screen, and that was in your staff report package, is the strip of properties that front on Manitou Drive. So right now those are all zoned M4. M4 is our heavy industrial zone. When that zone was put in place in 1985, it included a range of your typical heavy industrial uses, so manufacturing, research and development type of stuff. It also included a broad range of commercial land uses. And what we see in terms of, if you drive up and down Manitou, what you see in existence there are some, commercial schools such as karate studios and things like that. You also see used car dealerships. Things like that. Those are more commercial uses on the ground than they are heavy industrial uses. In the new zoning bylaw, we are proposing to update the zoning. The zoning is still titled heavy industrial employment, so from that perspective, there's no change, but due to provincial policy and regional policy in terms of protecting our employment areas for industrial employment type uses, it was important to achieve conformity with those documents by further restricting the commercial type of uses in that area. So that's the example of legal nonconforming. The example that Councillor Davey brought up about the car dealerships on Victoria and Shirley, there's some car dealerships on Manitou Drive here as well. That's an example of what will be legal nonconforming should Council pass the zoning bylaw that we eventually recommend.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Councillor Singh? Sorry, you were up next.
No, that's okay. I'm glad. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the question is, what is our feeling of allowing legal non-conforming? Is that what I'm understanding? So in aspects of where our opinion of what the zoning should be there changes, and if it's regressive, is that the best measure that we can to allow the continued use, as opposed to, what other options would we have?
So I would suggest that it's the best tool that we have to achieve the vision that's indicated in the council-approved official plan. So, and the approved direction from provincial policy to ensure that we have an adequate supply of industrial land to attract those types of users to our city and to our region. Having the change in zoning to have certain uses and certain properties go through legal non-conforming will, over time, ensure that those areas slowly evolve when they're ready to evolve and when the market is demanding that different uses go in there from an industrial point of view.
And so you answered my question. I think that is a prudent way of approaching it, so that there's aspect of fairness to the property owner too, especially when they have a certain use of their asset. The market will over time just bring that use of that zoning to what our intent or vision might be. So that would be my answer to the question. I think legal conforming is a good tool that I think handles the current need of that property owner, but at the same time sets expectation over time. Once that use terminates, then it brings it to the expected zoning. So I think it's a good tool.
Any other comments on this one? Not, I've got a couple. I've heard from some of the property owners that Councillor Davey has referenced as well. And I do have some concerns around the impact of this on some of those properties. And I understand, we're trying to signal a long-term desire, but when these have been built as recently as they have been, I guess two questions come to mind. One, have we identified a new area where we see automotive retail locations being located, because they do tend to cluster around each other and require a fair bit of land. So if they're not going to be there in the future, where do we hope to see them at some point? And the second part is, have we undertaken any discussion with the financial industry around this? Because one of the big problems I understand with legal non-conforming is the impact it has in terms of being able to get third-party financing. And as people look to sell their businesses or pass them on from one generation to the next and so on, this creates a fairly significant problem for them, and thus, I guess a problem for us indirectly. So I'm just wondering what staff's thoughts are on both of those. And if you don't have answers now, those are things I would be looking for answers for before anything that comes back.
So we have, we're proposing 5 commercial zones. Of those 5 commercial zones, I recall 4 of them would permit the sale of pretty much anything, the sale of cars included. And so there's lands across the city that would be zoned commercial that could accommodate any car dealership. The second part of your question with respect to financing, in conversation with our economic development staff and their contacts in finance, the answer to that question is that the lenders will still lend money, mortgages or lend money to properties which have a legal non-conforming status. They're still able to obtain and secure financing going forward.
So how extensive of our research has it been on that? I mean, anybody can always find financing. It's a question of what rate are you willing to pay for that financing. And so I guess my question is, does this put an undue burden on people to now have to, instead of being able to get conventional financing through the banks that a business would be able to get, do they now have to go to, third parties at much higher interest rates, thus creating financial challenges? Because that's part of what I'm hearing. So I'd like to really understand the scope of the research that we've done. I don't know, Mr. Bloom, can you help us on that, or is that information that's going to come back?
Through the chair, obviously I'm not the most, I have a colleague who is far better versed in this industry than I am, so maybe I'll circle back with him and provide some commentary to council. What I do appreciate is that most lenders are looking for levels of certainty within which they're investing, and typically if there's a default, that they have some security that whether it's the building or land that they're investing in, that there is some potential for them to get their money back essentially on whatever follows suit after that. So I think that is typically what vendors are looking for, is some level of certainty. But certainly I'll try to follow up with greater detail.
Okay. Any other comments from members of council? Sorry, who's staff 3? Oh, yes, go ahead.
Through the mayor, as we finish off that question, I just want to make sure we kind of summarize and highlight a couple key things. So,
let's have Councillor Davey to speak.
Sure.
Yeah, just before you summarize, Councillor Davey.
Yes, sorry, and this is more of a, I guess, a comment than finishing the loop on that car dealership area. I just want to voice my concern on it going forward, because it's not like there's one new dealership there. There's, I think one opened or maybe 2 opened just last year. Anyway, they're all very, very new. So I just want to make sure that this is a battle worth fighting from planning staff's perspective. I'm not sure the frequency that we go through this entire zoning process, but being that these are literally, the champagne was just broken off the back of them in many cases, is this something that we need to address in this zone change, or is this something that maybe we look at again in 10 years and look at the rezoning of those lands, if it's possible to offset those somewhere else? So that's just a comment that I want to be upfront with you before you get too deep into this process. I want to be 100% fair. I know you have your principles, but it is a concern of mine. So.
Sure.
I'd echo that as well.
Through the mayor, sorry, I didn't realize that Councillor Davey had buzzed in, but I was going to summarize about it so it's clear, because I think that council needs to be clear too that yourselves and staff are probably going to be boxed into a bit of a rock and a hard place on this one, especially about industrial lands. So if there are industrial employment areas that are protected employment, and if a landowner or if council wants to consider allowing commercial land uses, if there is no leeway in the official plan to allow that, because the zoning bylaw that's passed has to conform to your official plan, or you can't pass it. If there is no wiggle room in the official plan, that would trigger the need for an official plan amendment to also legalize car sales or whatever commercial use. And now we're kind of toast on that, to be upfront and use that kind of terminology. The provincial changes from the new growth plan essentially mean that a city council can't do that anymore, that the regional council would need to look at a comprehensive review of employment areas and what the appropriate change to any protected employment areas are. And they do that through a municipal comprehensive review and an amendment at that time. And so we could direct and have the region consider that when they're going to undertake that in 2019 is the next time that they're going to do that. This is brand new stuff. And this is what all municipalities are grappling with now in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, is that local level municipalities don't have this power now to do this. And this is a big change of strength that the province has indicated about employment lands to protect them. And so that really makes it tricky for us to deal with something like this. So that's why we're talking about the legal non-conforming, and to be honest, the Committee of Adjustment route for a legal non-conforming use, although it is a process, it's very short. It's actually, for a legal non-conforming use, it's much more open than even an actual minor variance is. And so there's a lot of leeway there, speed, and it's actually more cost effective too. So that's why we want to be clear that that is probably where we're going to be at in the spring of next year. For other non-employment areas, a little bit different.
So just to be clear on your question before I go to Councillor Marsh next, you say in our two-tier structure, the region would have to deal with this. If we were a single-tier municipality, what would the reality be?
To the mayor, then the single-tier municipality would be able to deal with it.
So they would be able to deal with it now?
So Guelph could do it, Hamilton could do it. They have to do it through a comprehensive review. So basically they have to look at all of the employment lands within their single-tier or upper-tier municipality at once and identify this area over here could be industrial, but maybe with a little bit of commercial. This area near this airport has to be employment only. And this area over here near this LRT area could transition to other uses. They have to do that at one time, in one review.
So is this something we missed when we did the OP? Or the provincial legislation changed after we did the OP and therefore we didn't know that?
Yeah, through to the mayor, this is something that changed in provincial, the growth plan, which is under provincial legislation. After the official plan, it came into effect on July 1st of this year. So it's brand new. And I'll tell you, when I was at the briefing with the province prior to it coming in, when the city was able to submit comments, it's the one question that I asked and pointed out. Why is this being kind of taken away from local municipalities and now going to just upper or single tier? And to be honest and open about it too, the city of Waterloo is grappling with the very same issue. Thankfully, Tina from our end, when we did, and council approved an interim direction within some of our LRT areas, put in some policies in our current official plan that allow us to transition some lands that are within the LRT areas. Other municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe don't have that luxury. So we can at least do some transitions, but if it's protected, it's protected. So the next time is when you look at a whole comprehensive review. Thankfully, the region intends to look at it within the next 2 years, but it's going to be a big topic of conversation, I would think, in 2 years.
Okay. Councillor Marsh?
Yeah, I just wanted to, the mayor had asked 2 questions and I didn't catch the answer to the first one. If these lands could, through the region's process or whatever, be able to have some commercial uses, these ones in particular where we're talking of Manitou and Victoria, Shirley area, would we be able to have non-commercial uses just for employment lands elsewhere within the city that would be less contentious?
Through the chair, we have a very limited supply of land that is set aside for industrial purposes. We did a comprehensive review of our employment lands from a city perspective as a precursor to the official plan that was approved by council. Through that process, the lands that we're now implementing zoning for are to protect our limited supply of employment land. So are there other opportunities? Possibly, as we get through station area planning processes and kind of determine what the appropriate land uses are there. But essentially, we have what we have, and if we let more of it go for non-employment uses, we have very little mechanism to get it back.
Just to supplement that, industrial land is a finite resource, and the city went through previously, we looked at options of where we might look at future land. Folks that may remember, we looked at the west side of the city and we decided downtown is where we wanted our employment focus. Regionally, it's out towards the airport and the north part of Cambridge. Imagine trying to redesignate and rezone land within your existing area for heavy industry that has ministry requirements for like 300-meter separation distances from certain sensitive uses, noise, etc. It's really hard to establish new industrial within an existing built-up area.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's all on question 1. We'll move on to question number 2. The draft zoning bylaw is proposing a zone to protect, conserve, manage environmental features. In some cases, this zone will apply on privately owned property. How can the city communicate the importance of protecting these features through zoning to private property owners? Thoughts, feedback? Councillor Fernandez.
So I really like that you use Sutherland Walk, because it certainly has been a concern since they first started developing that road. My understanding is that they had to put special material down because the road kept sinking when they were first developing. I think it's really critical for us to educate our residents that, and let's just use Sutherland Walk as an example because we have it in front of us. I'm pretty sure most of those people bought on that street was because they wanted to live in a natural area adjacent to trees and wetlands, and they were quite thrilled to have that. So when we identify this as a sensitive area, I think the way to buy in residents is by asking them, why did you buy here in the first place? And I think the answer is probably going to be because I loved the natural area, I loved backing onto woodlots, I loved having the forest or the natural area behind me. So I think in a way it's kind of flipping it on the resident by saying, you know, you may not agree with our designation here, but I think the reason you bought here was because of what you saw and what you wanted to protect. One of the things that I heard a number of times was about the change in the value of their properties. And I think that's probably what you heard as well. Would that be correct? And how have we, I guess I'm flipping it again to see how you guys have answered that, and how can we as councillors answer it to residents?
So through the chair, again, that's one of those frequently asked questions that we do have. And the answer to the question is essentially there's a difference between the value of a property from a taxation perspective and the value of a property from a market perspective. Market value is something completely, determined completely separately. The assessed value of the property, which is what we use to determine what the taxation rate is based on an assessed value that's determined by MPAC. And as we've communicated in our frequently asked question and through conversations that we've had with many property owners that are proposed to get this zone, is that it does not change the assessed value of the property. The only time there's a change in assessed value is if you're going from a raw land, so agricultural land, and then you're going to put an actual use on the property. A change from a residential zoned property to a zone that may restrict a portion of your property where you can no longer build any structures wouldn't have an impact on the assessed value. Market value is determined completely separately, and I can't really comment on that. It's really a perception. So it depends on what the current property owner and any future property owner determine as valuable. And as you mentioned, some may value backing onto a natural feature as something that's worth paying perhaps a little bit more money on, and others may not.
Okay. One of the things I think that this new zoning will stop residents from doing, I don't mean to stop them, but from give them restrictions, is if they build an additional building. So, but that would not include if they put a shed up, which is removable. This is specifically to adding an addition on. So if they decided to put a sunroom on or something, or put a pool in, those are permanent structures. Is that correct?
So through the chair, there's a couple of things with that. First of all, in most cases where we're proposing to apply this zone, it's on lands that already have restrictions from an environmental perspective. So when the lots were created, they were created based on a condition that was a requirement of the subdivision that said you can't build in that area. What's important is to protect the environmental feature. The proposed zoning is to make things more transparent so that property owners are aware of what they can and cannot do with their property. The way that the proposed natural heritage conservation zone is written is that the permitted uses, because the zoning bylaw deals with the way that you can use your property, is it tells you in that area of your property, the only use of land is conservation of that feature. If you have existing sheds, existing gazebos, decks, whatnot in that area, that's fine, and that goes to our previous conversation of legal non-conforming, legal non-complying. What it does mean going forward is that, no, you can't build anything in that area that would have a negative impact on that environmental feature. That, yes, would include additions to your house, but it may also include new sheds, new decks, gazebos, anything that would have a negative impact on that environmental feature.
Okay, and so just going back to your question is really trying to communicate the importance of protecting this, and I see that Ms. Steiner is here, and I think that's something she would definitely be passionate about, and this area specifically where we do have a lot of ESPAs and groundwater. I think that those are the kind of things that we need to use, that terminology. You know, this is, there's groundwater recharge here, there's ecological features here that can't be replicated anywhere else. And if we start degrading those, that it's detrimental to the area in general. I think that's wording that I'm hoping people would understand and would feel comfortable with wanting to protect the natural feature that is now behind their property or even on their property. Does that answer your question that you posed here? Okay, good, thanks.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. So if I'm understanding this correctly, we don't really have any ability to change what's identified, only we're the ones zoning it in accordance to the existing laws. Is that, like, we don't have the ability to say something, whether, like, at our level, whether something should be protected or not, that's dictated to us from the GRC, et cetera. We're just zoning it for that.
So through the chair, yes, that's correct. In almost 80% of the properties that we're proposing this zone on, it's to add zoning to protect a feature that is identified as regionally or provincially significant. And although we don't have the jurisdiction to determine what those features are because they're with the province or our region, we are the ones who have the tool, the zoning tool, to implement the protection of that feature.
Okay, so, and here's the rub for me. Like, who's going to end up contacting the property owners as a result of this? Is it going to be the City of Kitchener?
Through the chair, that's why we sent out those, I don't even remember, 2,200 letters a couple of years ago to all of these property owners.
A couple of years
Yes,
ago.
It's our responsibility. Yes, we felt pretty strongly that when you're changing rules on private property, that the property owner should know, and we put them on notice.
Okay, and yeah, and I don't dispute that. Quick comment, Mr. Mayor. I guess the only issue I have is that the ire, I would say, comes back to the people that implement the actual zoning versus the people that make the decision on and I've seen this firsthand over the years, but I can save that for another day. Thank you.
Councillor Marsh.
I just want to have an understanding. Does this include any area where the property is near a stream or a creek or a river where the property is within the floodplain, or is that separate?
Through the chair, in some cases it would get a natural heritage conservation zone if there are existing uses on those lands. So if there's already a house in a floodplain area, it would get our existing use floodplain zone, which essentially says you can't do any new development, but we're going to recognize any existing development on that site.
Okay. So yes, it does. That's within the scope here?
Through the chair, yes, it does apply to lands that are in a floodplain area.
Okay. And so what percentage of the land that will be designated with this zoning is actually already not conforming to the zoning? So, for example, those houses or buildings that are where really it should be a natural area instead.
Through the chair, it's approximately 53%.
That's pretty high. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Mayor Ivanovic. You had mentioned that current structures like sheds and gazebos are grandfathered in on this. If a citizen needed to replace one of those, if it had deteriorated, are they able to do that? Or is once the structure deteriorates, is that the end of it?
Through the chair, they could replace, maintain that structure.
Okay. So if they needed to completely put a new shed up, as long as it was the same size, same place?
Provided that it's same place, same size, doesn't get bigger, doesn't encroach more, then yes, it would, and from the perspective of you're trying to protect that natural feature, if that was already there, there would, theoretically, there would be no additional mitigating harm on that feature if it's exactly where it was as it stood.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm trying to understand this. So we are zoning on properties that already have designated attributes from other orders like GRCA. So by placing a zoning on it, because we're not changing the usage or we're not primarily protecting through zoning because they're restricted anyways, is the zoning ultimately just better identifying the current usage?
Through the chair, the zoning,
allowance of the current usage?
The zoning would be a more transparent tool to use to enhance the protection that in most cases is already on the property. So a lot of these properties, again, are the feature is conserved through conditions in subdivision. In some cases, they have encumbrances registered against the title of the property. So there's a tree management plan that's registered that says, these trees are protected, you can't cut them unless you get a permit, and then that permit has to be obtained from the city or the region in certain circumstances.
So is there a gray area though? And that's what we're trying to correct? Or no? It's pretty black and white, just the way it is right now as well.
Through the chair, I would suggest that what we're proposing from a zoning perspective will definitely make it clear what the intent is for those lands. It's easy to look up on a map the delineation of a natural heritage feature and know that in that area you can read the rules very easily. If you're looking for a tree management plan that might be registered on the title of your property, it requires going through a lawyer to pull the title, to pull the encumbrance and read through it, and possibly get a lawyer to help you understand it. It will also, transparency is the big one for us. We're not changing the rules on the property, we're changing the tool that we're using to protect that feature. So it's easy, to, as you can see from the slide, it's easy to look on the map and see the pink area is an area that is treated differently than the other portion of the property.
So it's better housekeeping of those zoning.
From our perspective, it is. So it's easy for us when we get inquiries at the front counter and for our building division, when they're looking up and telling people where they can build on their property, it makes it clear, and then property owners have a better understanding of how they can use their property.
Of the properties that were identified, are there any that there were certain usages or development that was allowed, but now through the zoning or restrictions, it's going to impede? Or
yes, and in most of those cases, if there was an existing development on the lot, the official plan provides us the mechanism to recognize those existing uses in zoning.
I'm sorry, I'm talking about future development.
Future. Can you ask the question again, please?
So of the properties that are identified that, for the zoning, for the environmental attributes, were there any that, because of now zoning of them, that there was some development that could be allowed, but because more prescribed, more black and white policy would restrict them from any development?
Through the chair, there are some properties that have a development zone, so a residential zone now, that would be converting to natural heritage conservation. In most cases, it's not the entire property.
Okay. And are the residents typically or the property owner in agreement with this this process, or is there pushback on that?
Through the chair, there's support for the principle of the zone. Where it comes down to is the application of the zone on private property, and did we delineate the boundary appropriately? One thing that Barb and I and others are doing is we are reevaluating our boundaries that we established as part of the first draft. We're going out to certain areas, we're meeting with property owners, we're walking properties to make sure that we have that boundary appropriate. We know that these rules are placing more transparent restrictions on properties. We take that seriously. We want to make sure we have the boundary correct, as correct as possible.
The other question I had was, you said 80%. What about the other 20%? I think this was...
Through the chair, the other 20% of the properties would be related to locally significant features that we identified through our own official plan work.
Okay, so they're not identified through GRCA or different orders of government, that we are picking those. And that's where the, I guess, certain restrictions to their ability to develop or change usage comes in?
Through the chair,
because they would have been allowed otherwise because there weren't restrictions in place currently.
In some cases, they would have had encumbrances on the property. So a tree savings plan would have been registered on the property saying you can't cut down trees. But from a zoning perspective, no, it was a residential zone that said, please build residential on your property, or a regulated type of zone.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. Okay, so my question is kind of on the understanding that staff is what's going to be setting the boundaries on each property and what's going to be considered part of the natural heritage conservation.
Can you pull the mic up towards you? Thank you.
Did you hear that question?
So through the chair, it's not just staff deciding. In a lot of cases, we go back and we research what studies were done as part of the subdivision. So we're going through old records and pulling out old tree savings plans, conditions of subdivision. We are working with the GRCA and the region and the property owners to determine the appropriate boundary. In a lot of cases, in most cases, we can get our hands on the technical studies that were done as part of that subdivision, and that's the information that we are basing our boundaries on.
Okay. I guess my other question too is, regards to this is, who has the ultimate decision on these properties? Does council have the ultimate decision on these properties, on how they'll be shaped?
Through the chair, council is the ultimate approval authority on the city's new zoning bylaw.
Okay, so we don't have any other higher level government that will force us to put these types of designations and restrictions on these landowners.
So through the chair, any decision of council must conform to the city's new official plan.
Okay. I'm just a little concerned. I know you guys know what I'm talking about. I just feel like we're ruffling a lot of feathers, and I tend to side with the residents with this one. But I just want to be able to be clear that we can decide on what's going to be redesignated or whatever it may be. So, okay, thanks.
Councillor Galloway-Sealock.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question with regards to, I understand that you're looking at the boundaries and looking at them overall, and Natalie, you and I have emailed about one specific property that you might not remember off the top of your head, but along Ottawa Street. Is there the opportunity to have some give and take, or is there going to be a definitive line? For example, it's Ottawa Street where they have a lot of forest around them, and they would appreciate the front portion not being designated, but they're not so worried about the back half because it's all tree lot. Is there the ability to have some of that give and take through this process? And I only use that one property as an example.
Through the chair, there's always the ability to have those conversations. We need to get into the technical studies to determine if there are any technical studies and regional information, because my understanding is that area has some provincially significant features and regionally significant features, so there may not be much that we have the authority to do in terms of delineating the boundaries of those features. I will say that on those particular properties on Ottawa Street, we know that there's existing houses on those lots, and we have recognized that through special provisions. So they do have, they will be legally recognized in the new zoning bylaw, whatever use they have on the property now.
Right, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to build additional outbuildings or whatever on that property if they desired. It would just be what they currently have now.
Through the chair, based on what we've drafted as part of the first draft, yes, that's correct.
Okay. As for your question, I don't really have any advice because it's actually a really tough question. I think people understand the importance of protecting the environment, but they purchase their properties, they own them, it's their asset in their life, and so they're very protective of it. And so while everyone can probably sympathize with the fact that there's environmental features, those weren't identified to them, when they purchased these lands. And some of them, like the Ottawa Street example, probably never had a plan of subdivision or really anything to go along with it. So I think it's a really difficult place to be, and so I don't know how to communicate it better or help people understand the importance. I think we just have to do the best we can, and I think you guys have had a really good process to this point, and you've put a lot of work and dedication into this, so that I know is appreciated from the residents I've heard from, and so I guess I just say stay the course and keep giving the best information you can to assist them and help them understand.
Councillor Fernandez?
Yeah, I just wanted to go one step further than what Councillor Ioannidis was suggesting, because I'm a little bit concerned that we're going to start degrading some of these designations if we start piecemealing. So, for example, if we take Truman Street, there's no street name that I know of in the city of Kitchener, and Truman Street looks a little bit like part of Sutherland Walk, where my understanding is during the draft application, there was agreements that were put into place under. Sorry, I lost it. Subdivision agreement and registered encumbrances on the title. So, but on Willow Street, and so you've got a lot of pushback on Truman Street, but you don't get as much pushback on Willow Street because those residents are quite thrilled to have this designation. I'm worried that what I'm hearing is that there may be because there's pushback on from the people on Truman Street, but not the people on Willow Street, that we're going to say, okay, Willow Street is going to be fine, they're going to get their NHC, one zone, but the people on Truman Street will not. And if there's an ESPA, that's a provincially significant area. If it's a PSW, that's governed by the province. So there is a higher level of authority overseeing those kind of areas, correct?
So through the chair, to your point, I would suggest that we have an obligation as staff to recommend to you, and there's an obligation for the decision to be consistent citywide. There may be site-specific considerations that we have to factor in certain areas. However, we have an obligation to recommend to you something that is consistent with our official plan, consistent with provincial policy, and conforms to it. Our approach is, as we're addressing the comments that we received with respect to this topic, is not only to go back and revisit those areas, but to revisit the entire city, to make sure that the boundary of the zone, especially if it applies on private property, is based on the best and most accurate data that we have available to us. At the time that we tabled the first draft of this zone on private property, it was the best information that we could get our hands on at that time. It's been 2 and a bit years since then, so we've had some more time to work with better data, to work with our partner agencies, the GRCA and the region, to walk areas, to get access to better mapping, to pull more historic documents, to refine the boundaries. Our hope is that when we bring you a final bylaw in the spring of next year, that the zone will apply where we strongly feel it is necessary to apply, and where it is not necessary to apply, it will no longer apply to those private properties.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I was just wondering if any consideration has been given to an idea that perhaps we could add a provision in the bylaw where existing built structures are on these sensitive lands, allowing property owners to perhaps who wish to perhaps renovate or add to existing buildings, if they could have a list of things to do that they could offset the impact with additional features like green roofs or what have you, that would essentially balance out the impact that they're having on the environmentally sensitive areas.
So through the chair, if these structures are on proposed NHC zoned land, they would be considered legal non-conforming, legal non-complying. And as our previous discussion, they have the ability to make an application to the Committee of Adjustment. And those are the types of things that we could consider, and there could be conditions placed on the decision of the Committee of Adjustment with respect to any enlargement or expansion to any structures that are in that area, should the committee choose to approve that.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Singh, then I'll make my comments and we should get to the last question.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I was able to ask questions and I get the chance to provide comments, so I'll do that. I absolutely agree with both concerns laid out by Councillor Ioannidis and as articulated by Councillor Galloway-Sealock. Again, of course, we have to be good stewards of the environment, and we need to have policies that are protection in nature. But there are ways that we can engage with the resident if they have a lands that they purchase, maybe development or different vision that they may have had for their property, of how we can approach in outlining our priority, but at the same time working with what they want to do with it. That's on the site, or in some cases, if you're dealing with in the development community, you can allow bonusing. Perhaps there's a restriction on their one site, but it allows some other bonusing on a different site, as long as they can identify. Those are just examples of ways of working around, of contention that we may have. But I share the sentiment that we need to approach it as a way to come to terms with what their concerns may be and try to find suitable ground.
Okay, and I'll just add my own comments. I think as we look at this issue, we need to strike the right balance between, being good stewards of these environmentally sensitive lands, with the recognition that for most people, their residential property is the single greatest asset that they own, and as I think Councillor Galloway-Sealock indicated, many of these people may not even be aware of some of these sensitivities. I think as this moves forward, I know we were proactive and sent out one set of letters. We may actually, since it's been a couple of years, want to think about sending out a second set. I know that will generate a whole level of input, which may not be what staff want or what council wants, but I also think, particularly once we're more definitive in terms of the direction we're going to be going, I think that may need to be something that we consider, because this does potentially have a significant impact on some of these properties. I think perhaps some of the issues might be able to be addressed through the kind of thing that Councillor Marsh talked about, and maybe in these kinds of circumstances we find a different Committee of Adjustment mechanism or fee to accommodate these properties, so they're not getting hit with the full range of costs associated with a Committee of Adjustment, as one way of giving them a tool to perhaps do some things, but not having to at least not having the full brunt of the costs associated with it. At the end of the day, I do tend to put a lot of weight on the fact that this is most people's significant greatest asset, and we really need to make sure we're not minimizing their ability to make full use of their home going forward. So those would be my thoughts on that. Okay, moving on to number 3, the 2018 final draft zoning bylaw is anticipated to include most of the content tabled as part of the first draft zoning bylaw. See the detailed list below. What questions do you have about the final draft zoning bylaw?
Sorry, I'll just interject there. The list below is in the staff report.
Okay.
So generally, the version of the final bylaw that we are intending to table at a statutory public meeting in the spring of next year, as I mentioned previously in the presentation, will include the entirety of a new zoning bylaw with the exception of the residential zones and any regulations that relate only to those residential zones. An example of that is the proposed regulations for driveway and garage widths. That's one example. The 2018 final draft zoning bylaw will also not include zoning in specific geographies. In those geographies, there's a list in the staff report, but they include the parts areas, secondary plan areas, and certain community plan areas such as Hidden Valley, Bridgeport East, and a few other areas as well.
Marsh?
This is so much anticipated, and so I'm just trying to picture how it's going to be. Usually we get our reports 10 days ahead, and so help us out. Can you tell us how you're going to be rolling this out, and will we have enough lead time to really absorb the information, and also for the public to absorb the information before they come?
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, for saying this is much anticipated. We don't get much enthusiasm when we talk about zoning rules for the most part, although we do talk about this with enthusiasm at every open house that we're at. Yes, we understand it's a significant body of work. That's why we decided to table a first draft over 2 years in a series of components. We will do our best to ensure that there's as much lead time as possible. The Planning Act requires a minimum 20 days notice in advance of a statutory public meeting. Our idea at this point is to provide more notice than that, if possible. We are working towards a final draft to be completed early next year. That'll go through an internal review as it needs to before it makes its way to you. That being said, we've amassed a significant contact list. We're in constant communication with them. Part of what we're doing is, in response to all of the comments that we've received, we are communicating back to them in advance of the statutory public meeting so that they understand what staff's recommendation will be in the final draft. When they see the final draft, it shouldn't be a surprise to them. The other advantage to responding to those comments in advance of the statutory public meeting is that if they still have a concern with what we will recommend in the final draft, there's still an opportunity for dialogue in advance of the statutory public meeting.
Okay, and do you have on our Kitchener.ca website a living document, could you resend a link to the first draft?
Through the chair, yes. The complete first draft is on our website. The version that you would have got as part of your council package at the end of May is the most up-to-date first draft.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Yes. Where in this list of 19 items outside of the Natural Heritage Conservation Zone, because I would say that's probably the most significant change in zoning, what other areas do you expect to see some pushback or some questions or concerns? Can you identify those now or at some
So
point?
through the chair, part of the discussion today and the reason we asked or proposed the discussion questions that we did was to kind of tease out that information, to bring to your attention what I always describe as hot button issues that we expect you will hear at the statutory public meeting. Despite our best efforts, we will not be able to resolve absolutely every issue that's raised. We will do our best, but there will be people here at the statutory public meeting. I don't know if we're talking a couple of handfuls or if we're talking hundreds. We will do our best to get the numbers down and resolve as much as possible. The number one issue is the application of the Natural Heritage Conservation Zone on private property, which is why we're spending so much time making sure that we have the best data we have and that our recommendation is sound. The other top issue is the range of permitted uses in the new industrial employment zones, which is what started the conversation or discussion question 1. We have a quite an open zoning framework now with respect to our business park and our industrial zones. It permits quite a wide range of uses that, in some cases, maybe a little bit of a stretch to say that they actually implement the intent of a heavy industrial type of zone. But that was the way of thinking that was around 30 years ago, and a lot has changed in the last 30 years. That is an issue you will hear at the statutory public meeting. There are other concerns that have been raised from more of a regulatory framework on some of the design-related regulations in our proposed mixed-use and new downtown zones. There were some concerns related to our bonusing framework, but mainly related to the proposed FSR. We're hoping to resolve those in advance of the statutory public meeting. Trying to recall other things that came up. A large one that came up earlier this year was with respect to new residential uses in the agricultural zones. We're confident that we've resolved that. Existing residential uses would be permitted, and that's what we proposed in the zone. Going forward, any existing lots of record that are in the agricultural zone, what we'd be recommending as part of the final draft is that a new residential use could occur on that existing parcel. We're confident that that's going to resolve the majority of the comments we've heard on that zone.
I noticed that the stormwater management zone is I would believe it's a new designation from our previous bylaw. Are we seeing some significant questions around that now, or is that, do people, especially with the number of storms and the number of issues we've had with the changes in our climate, are we seeing people understand what the zone?
Through the chair, the stormwater management ponds that we have are typically publicly owned, and they're typically right now zoned, we call them P zones, so it's a public type of zone. The change was to make it more clear where those assets are. We received 1% of our comments received on that. I think it was maybe 1 or 2 comments on those zones. So no, there's general support for having a zone specific for those.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other comments or feedback? If not, that looks like it is it for today. I guess I would encourage members of council, if they have other questions or additional feedback after today, to continue to provide that to staff sooner rather than later, as they continue to work on this and plan to bring it back at some point in 2018. So with that, we'll move on to item number 3, motion to go in camera for the 2 items indicated. Councillor Fernandez, Councillor Marsh, all those in favor, opposed, that's carried. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Schneider, Councillor Ioannidis, all those in favor, opposed, that's carried.